Hi, it's Fiona here, and in this video tutorial I'm just going to do a really brief overview of domain names. So a domain name is a www.address.com on the internet, and it's an identification label that enables users to locate you on the internet. And sometimes the term's used interchangeably with URL, although technically they're not the same. So when you go online and buy a domain, you're frequently referred to as the domain owner. In fact, you don't own the domain. What you buy is an exclusive license to use that domain for a period of time. So you don't actually have any legal ownership, although you do have exclusive right of use. Now, for newbies out there who are just entering the internet space, it's important to note that buying a domain is different from getting a website built. So what happens when you buy a domain is that domain is hosted on one computer, which is called a DNS or a domain name server. And that's then pointed to a hosting server where you load your website. So what happens is there are two computer servers involved with your website. One has the domain name and the other has the website, and the domain name is pointed to the website. So in other words, if someone says, I want this domain name, it's basically automatically forwarded to where your website is hosted. So if I was to advise you, one of the first rules that I would say is do not build your site under anybody else's domain. So even if it's sold to you as an easier option, it could end up being a really bad trap that you can't then get out of. If you build a site using a third-party subdomain, for example, the person that owns the primary domain can turn you off, can restrict your access, can delete your website, has complete control over your website, and you're pretty much powerless to stop them. Also beware of free domains. They can often come with T's and C's and fine print that leads to you being trapped with a particular provider. So make sure that you just buy your domain outright and you have complete control over that. So, if you don't like your coder, you can move on, or you don't like your hosting company, you can move on. You're not in a position where you're trapped. The second tip I'd offer you is get your country domain name first. So, for example, in New Zealand, it's .co.nz, in Australia, it's .com.au, in the UK, it's .co.uk. We call those country top-level domains, or TLDs. Try and get yours, particularly if you trade in your local market. Google does present local results to local searches first. If you have a business that does service multiple trading markets, there are a number of different options that you can use in terms of domain names and how you structure your site, and those are covered off in the notes in this tutorial. The third tip I'd offer is really shop around on the price of domains, and there are people who will charge you $150 a year for a domain or to renew a domain when you can go and renew it somewhere else for $10. It really doesn't matter where you buy your domains. What matters is that you have control over where they're pointed. And my suggestion, for what it's worth, is that you buy your domain from a person that's separate to your web development or hosting company. And that way they're quite separate, and if anything happens where you have a fallout with your web developer or your hosting company, your domain name can't be held to ransom. There are also some reports that some web companies plant cookies. So when you visit their site and you look for a domain in their search engines, they plant a cookie in your computer, and when you come back, the domain's flagged as a premium domain and the price has gone up. So if that happens to you, the best thing to do is just go to an alternative supplier of domain names and check the availability of that domain name through their search engine. And that way you'll probably get it at the original cheap price. Finally, some people like to keep their domain name private, so they don't want people to go to whois type directories and be able to see who owns the rights of use for that domain. If you want to do that, that's fine. Most hosting companies will offer that as a separate service, so you may be charged something to keep that information private, but the service is generally offered. The fourth tip I'd offer you is just to be aware of cyber squatters. So cyber squatters are people who pretend to be you because you've got a successful site. So they release a website that has a domain name that's similar to you in the hopes that people will think that their website actually is your website. So for example, it could be somebody out there might get a site and put it up called undercover-strategist.com, and people will think, oh, that's this site, when it's obviously not this site. And often when you go there, there's lots of advertising and affiliate links. So if you don't want that to happen to you when you're buying your domain, just buy the variations. So you might have the .com.au domain name, and you might buy the .net.au equivalent, and you might buy the single and the plural versions of that and the hyphenated versions. And that means that, for a relatively cheap amount of money, you've got insurance against cyber squatters because the domain names have been taken off the market. One of the really common questions that marketers have is, choosing between business brand and generic keyword domains. So, business domain is the name of your business. A brand name is obviously the name of a brand you might carry, and a generic keyword domain relates to a product category. So, for example, you would have Foster's, which is a business name, and then they might have Stella Artois, which is a brand name of a product owned by Foster's, and then that might all sit under beer.com.au, which is obviously a generic keyword for a product category. A lot of marketers say, well, which ones should we be going for? I would suggest that you always take your business name off the market so nobody else can buy the rights to use it and pass offers yourself. So that would have to be your number one position, that you would take your business name off. So then you might think, well, do I want my brand name or do I want my product category? The brand name is usually owned by the manufacturer or the owner of that brand name. So in the same way that you would take your business domain off the market, if the brand name was available, you would want to take that off the market as well. If nothing else, just to stop imposters pretending to be you. In terms of buying the generic keywords for a product category, now this is where it gets really interesting, because actually the world's biggest online bookstore is not books.com, it's Amazon, and the world's biggest search engine is not searchengine.com, it's Google. So generics are good to own, but do bear in mind that the world's biggest online brands typically don't use generics. They use nouns that can be easily branded. So if you're a marketer out there and you're thinking, well, do I pick up a generic domain or do I go for something that's brandable? If you've got a long-term strategy for the internet, then definitely go for something that's brandable as the first position. So other things to consider are the length of the domain name. Short names are better. Hyphenated names are also great for search engines, but consumers don't like them. They think they're affiliate sites. So probably avoid hyphenated names. And the big one is keep the spelling simple. Choose a name that rolls off the tongue. It's not hard for people to pronounce, and above all else, avoid domain names that spell something other than what you intended. When it comes to ownership limitations on domains, some of the country top-level domains do have restrictions that apply. Now, you need to go to your local domain administrator to find out what the rules are for your particular market. But for some markets, you can't just buy and sell domains at will. And certainly in certain countries, you have to be related to that field. You have to prove that you're entitled to use the exclusive rights of use for that domain. Now, worldwide, domains are managed by the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers, which is ICANN, ICANN. Australia has a membership of that forum, and in Australia, that organisation's AUDA, and it also handles complaints related to domain names and domain name resellers or registrars. But you should contact those people, AUDA, if you're in Australia and you have a problem relating to domain names, and often reputable law firms are pretty much up to date with online trademark infringement issues, or they're able to recommend to you another lawyer who's an expert in that field. So that wraps the general overview of domain names. and there's more information and more detail in the notes, and also a cheat sheet you can download and keep. I hope that's been useful, and stay tuned, there's always plenty more.